Chris, Lee and Blayne Gilmer of Southeastern 14 here to preview one of the most anticipated matchups of week one of the college football season. That is North Carolina and South Carolina. That's going to take place Saturday, September the 2nd, 7:30 Eastern. That game will be held in Charlotte, which actually I think is about 30 minutes closer, according to Google Maps, to South Carolina's campus than it is to North Carolina's, even though it is in the state of North Carolina, of course. Covers.com has North Carolina as about a 2.5 point favorite, with about a 62.5 point over under as we do this on August the 2nd. Two teams, Blayne, that finished 2022 headed in very different directions, what I think causes some confusion and lots of things as we go into this one. South Carolina, of course, pulled upsets over Tennessee and Clemson to end the regular season before losing to Notre Dame in its bowl game. And, of course, North Carolina was what? Something and one before losing its last four games. Although, granted, three of those four were by 4 points or less. Should be a tremendous game and I think much-watched TV for most college football fans in week one.
Absolutely. And since most of our fan base, Chris, is SEC fans that tune in here to Southeastern 14, what I would equate North Carolina to last year is kind of the Ole Miss of the ACC. Had that great start to get going, and then it kind of fell apart on them towards the end there to get things going. But Drake May and Spencer Rattler, what a quarterback matchup. Of course, we see neutral site game, Vegas. The Caesars has them right now 3-point favorite. DraftKings maybe a little bit lower than that. North Carolina, as you said, 62 over under. But look at that return in production for each team. South Carolina lost a lot. They had to go into the portal and get a lot. North Carolina, they brought in a couple of key pieces in the portal at receiver, and we'll get into that and things of that nature. But really, this is a experienced team with a very experienced coaching staff. And not only do they have, and I say experienced, but Mac Brown's been around a long time. They bring in Chip Lindsey to be offensive coordinator, and then also they have Gene Chizik as defensive coordinator. So, I mean, this staff has been around a while, Chris.
Yeah, those are some names if you go back a few decades. I actually remember going to a game in Chapel Hill first time Mac Brown was coaching Carolina. They had it rolling then, and at moments he's had it rolling now. And look, everything this year starts on offense for Carolina. We're going to start with Carolina having the ball first in that matchup, because I think if you're just Joe fan tuning in and you do not care, what you're tuning in for is to watch Drake May, who was the ACC Player of the Year this time a year ago. He is a potential number one overall selection for the 2024 draft. He threw for 4,321 yards, 38 touchdowns, 7 picks, ran for 698 more. They lost some guys, but they also picked up some dudes in the portal. We'll get into the supporting production in a minute, but the Drake May show is one that you don't want to miss when you get a chance this fall. And there's many reasons I look forward to watching this game, but that would be one of them.
Oh, yeah, he's a bona fide star. If Caleb Williams wasn't still around, he would definitely be the number one pick going into the draft, providing that he has even close to the year that he had last year. This year, Caleb Williams and him are going to kind of jockey back and forth. You hear, arguments for each guy, but when you lose a guy like Josh Downs at receiver, who was so productive. Now Drake May has to, step it up and say, okay, now I can make these other guys that we're bringing in, or these younger guys that are stepping into bigger roles, even better. So that's something that NFL scouts, I'm sure, will be looking at. But, and we'll get into the same thing on South Carolina's quarterback situation when we talk about their side of the ball. But defensively against him, you would think that this defense of Shane Beamer's would be ultra excited game one to really it's a measuring stick to see, okay, here's maybe the best quarterback in the country that you get to go up against. And that secondary for South Carolina has some playmakers in it. So Chris, I know you're going to get into the numbers here, but I think it's going to be an intriguing matchup when it comes to guys like Nick Emmanwori and all those guys in the back end trying to thwart Drake May and that offensive attack for North Carolina.
Well, and if people are looking at our graphic here and saying, wait a minute, North Carolina's yards per carry and whatever yards per pass that South Carolina gave up is different than what I've got, we take sacks out and count sacks as passing plays. So those come off that. Really, neither team, Carolina had a hard time stopping the ball. That's not really what North Carolina does best, although they've got a really deep running back room, Blayne. I think their top 6 rushers return, which includes Drake May, who led them in rushing.
Number one.
Yeah, I mean, it's not there's nobody in that room that really scares you, but they've got a lot of depth. They've got a lot of different dudes that all average around 5 yards a carry, and just having guys back who know what's going on and, can sort of protect, pass protect and some things like that, which that was an issue for North Carolina a year ago. That's nice. Receivers, we talked about that. I think UNC lost its best 2 receivers. I think both are in the NFL. I could be
Josh
wrong about
Downs,
that.
definitely a big blow.
Yeah, but they got Nate McCollum at Georgia Tech. Last year, he went 60 catches, 655 yards, and 3 scores. Tez Walker from Kent State went 58, 921, and 11. Both those kids have moved to a much better passing circumstance. Georgia Tech wasn't exactly a great offensive team a year ago, from what I remember, and Kent State just wasn't very good at football in general. So,
except against Georgia. And that is when Tez
right.
Walker, listen, that is where Tez Walker put his name on the map and really became coveted, because Georgia played man-to-man coverage against those guys, and he's 6'3", 175, 180 pounds. Chris, he put on a clinic. He had like 7 catches for 106 yards and a touchdown, I believe, against Georgia last year. So that's when his name became available, because the head coach at Kent State became the offensive coordinator for Deion Sanders, and a lot of those Kent State Golden Flashes decided to hit the portal after that. When that happened, Tez Walker was one of the most coveted guys on the transfer portal market, and Mac Brown went out and got him.
Well, there you go. I'd forgotten that. Great tight end room. I think they've got over 1,000 yards returning from their tight ends of receiving. They've got 4 offensive line starters back. They got Willie Lampkin from Coastal, who I think was a 3-time All Sun Belt guy. So offensive line should be in good shape. But Carolina's got some players on defense too. That'd be South Carolina. I'm in the habit of saying Carolina, given that we're an SEC channel. I'm going to have to break myself of that this time. But
who's
we
the
talked
real
about
Carolina? Leave your comments.
Right.
Who's the real Carolina?
That's what we're going to find out. East Carolina, right? There you go.
Yeah.
We'll make everyone mad. But I mean, South Carolina, they bring back 2 freshman safeties who were first-team freshmen All-American last year, and that's as true freshmen. We talked about Tonka Hemingway in our South Carolina preview. Should be one of the more productive defensive linemen in the league. I think we went into their linebackers. I think they think they're going to be better there, just with some experience and maybe some health. They added Jatius Gear from Syracuse, who maybe can help them a little bit in the pass rush. They lost a couple of really good corners, but they've also got one pretty good one coming back as well. So you've got that. I think their nickelback returns too, or at least maybe he wasn't a returning starter, but you know what it was. He played a lot 2 years ago and was hurt last year. That's David Spalding is who I'm thinking of. I'm going through my notes doing this. And Marcellus Dial, of course, was pretty good as a corner for them a year ago. South Carolina was pretty good against the pass last year, but I'm not sure that they faced a team. Well, no, they did. They faced Tennessee. We know how that one went. But you don't face a lot of teams like North Carolina every week, I guess is a better way to say it.
Yeah, North Carolina was a very, very explosive team. I think when you look at, they've got all these advanced metrics, and one that I saw that North Carolina exceeded in was when you talk about explosive play rate. North Carolina was way up there in the top 10 when it came to it, because Drake May was hitting big plays down the field a lot of times to Josh Downs. So that is something that, DQ Smith, Nick Emenwari, all these guys on the back end, those safeties staying deep. And then anytime you replace 2 corners, Chris, in the secondary that are NFL guys, that's not easy to do. So it's going to be incumbent upon guys that have been around, like Marcellus Dial, to really step up and make sure that they're taking control. You mentioned David Spalding, a guy who has played there at South Carolina, albeit it hasn't played in a little bit because of injuries and stuff like that. How does the health look of Mo Kaba coming back off the knee injury, and Jordan Strawn? They lost both of those guys last year. I believe after that Georgia game, not too long after, to knee injuries. So when that happens, how's the confidence when you come back? You know, you have to work through those things. So there's talent up front. We know that South Carolina has talent up front. We know that despite having Drake May, North Carolina is going to want to establish the run early. For South Carolina to give their secondary and some of the pieces that are fitting in the best chance against some of these new talented North Carolina receivers and tight ends and Drake May, Chris, I believe that South Carolina, Tonka Hemingway, Huntley up front have to completely stymie the North Carolina run game early, make them one-dimensional, and then at least you know it's going to be Drake May attacking you through the air, and you'll be able to plan accordingly, hopefully keeping them in longer yardage situations. So I think that's kind of the game plan there for South Carolina.
Well, one other thing, one way South Carolina won games a year ago was special teams. We'll get to that at the last. Another way was turnovers at certain times. And North Carolina, just not an offense that turns the ball over a lot. We put turnover rate up on our graphics. That's not a stat that you see a lot, but I'll just give you a clue. 1.4% is outstanding.
Yeah, it's killer. I mean, that's taking care of the football. And listen, we talk a lot of times in the SEC, but it's not just an SEC things. If you're going to win in major college football now, and we look at the past national champions, yes, we've seen teams like, the 2019 LSU kill people through the air, and we've seen Alabama do it in 2020. But for the most part, Chris, what has been the main success? It's been teams that can run the football when they want to, stop the run, and protect the football. Those three things, you can do those three things, you get a chance to win and win big in college football nowadays. So we'll see how that pans out for these two teams going into 2023.
Blayne, I'll have you flip the graphic to the other side of the matchup when South Carolina's got the ball. It was just kind of a tale of two seasons for the Gamecocks. They simplified their offense late. That is when things took off. I think South Carolina fans and that program have put a lot of stock in that and Spencer Rattler's late resurgence. And I'm not saying they're wrong. They may not be, but it was a very small sample size. But when they had it, South Carolina was much, much better. They did not run the ball particularly well a year ago. I don't know that they're going to be super strong in the running game this year. In the passing game, I think they've got a pretty good core of receivers. Of course, everybody knows about Juice Wells, who is an All-American candidate. They added Eddie Lewis, who I think should help them in the slot, a transfer from Memphis, who caught, about 600, 700 yards worth of balls a year ago and might help them in the return game, potentially. They got Nicholas Harbor. Been interested to see where that goes. I don't know how much of a factor he's going to be in week one. He was a big-time track star and one of the better offensive recruits the Gamecocks have signed in many, many, many years. But he will be learning receiver and trying to break in week one, I would presume. So how big of a factor is he right away? I don't know. They added Trey Knox, a tight end from my neck of the woods here in the Nashville area, who was a stud in high school, had a nice career at Arkansas, should fit in nicely in Columbia. And then you got South Carolina's defense, Blayne. My goodness, that was ugly a year ago. I don't
North
think
Carolina.
North Carolina. Man,
a lot of Carolinas.
I'm glad we won't get any more Carolinas again this year in our previews, because it's just a headache to remember. To clarify, North Carolina did not do anything really well on defense a year ago. Did get a little bit better late in the season for whatever that's worth. Did not force turnovers, was not good against the pass, was not good against the run, did not sack the quarterback, did not pass go, did not collect $200. And they reloaded a little bit. I think they bring in maybe three different starters in the secondary. Two had played, I think, at Power 5 schools. And then they got an FCS first-team All-American from East Tennessee State who had 6 picks a year ago and I think started something like 30 games. What do you see of note on this side of the matchup?
What I see of note on this side of the matchup is I think that, obviously, as you said, North Carolina didn't do a whole lot right in certain areas on defense last year. There were going to be opportunities for Spencer Rattler, for Juice Wells to make big plays early. The question is, we talked about South Carolina having to make North Carolina one-dimensional when it came to their offense. I think South Carolina is going into this game one-dimensional, Chris, because I do not know if South Carolina is going to be effective in the run game at all. I think there's questions up front on the offensive line. I think that the running back is a massive question. Who even do they have even a guy who can end up being the guy that you feel really good about as an SEC running back? I mean, they've got D'Kerion Joyner, who's played different positions around there, but I don't know if they have a guy that they say, hey, we feel like we can give him the ball 15, 20, 25 times if needed, and he'll be able to get it done. Most SEC teams have a guy that they can point to and say, that's it. That's not the case for South Carolina. But one guy that you didn't really mention by name, but we said there's some nice pieces on the South Carolina receiving corps, Xavier Leggett. He's a guy that's been around a while, Chris, but hasn't been as productive probably as he wants to be or would tell you that he should have been. But he's a guy he's got size. He's got talent. He was a highly coveted recruit. He's a redshirt senior this year. I mean, 6'3", 227 pounds, Chris. That is a physical receiver. And, that's a good matchup for South Carolina because they're going to do what? They're going to try to rotate a safety over top of Juice Wells, double team him maybe, and that's going to say who is the second guy. Is it Trey Knox at tight end that's able to get one-on-one matchups and cook that way, or is it going to be Xavier Leggett? So I think that there's opportunities and plays to be made in the passing game. I just wonder with a guy in Spencer Rattler, who I think has matured and has handled a lot of things well this offseason. I'll commend him for that. But he's also turnover prone at times, and we see in their turnover percentage rate down there that you're going to get to, it kind of comes and goes. And without as well as I do, Chris, without a guy that you can just turn and hand the ball to every once in a while and know that he's going to get 4 or 5 yards, where the defense isn't, just dropping out in coverage all the time, it makes it a lot harder on a quarterback.
Yeah, fair points there. Another one we probably missed, Josh Simon, transferred to South Carolina from Western Kentucky, had a nice career at Western. I don't really know how much they use the tight end of that offense, although I think they have used it a lot in years past and all that, I think. But some offenses use that a lot, some don't. South Carolina's used it a decent amount, it seems like to me. So 2 good tight ends coming in. Special teams, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but South Carolina is probably the best one in the country. They
Beamer
block
ball.
punts, they fake field goals. Yes, I mean it's coached. South Carolina's coached by Beamer. What do you expect? It's like going into KFC and not getting chicken. So yes, that's going to be a big thing. I don't think Mitch Jeter missed a field goal a year ago. Kai Kroger is one of the best punters in the league. He's I think got 3 for 3 with 3 touchdowns or something like that as a passer.
There you go.
They're really good in the return game. But, hey, North Carolina's got a punter that averaged almost 47 a boot last year. Now, I don't think they had to punt it a lot, but when they did, he was good. I think their field goal game is a little shaky, and I would be lying if I told you I'm an expert on what they do in the return game. But South Carolina is going to have an edge in special teams over just about anybody it plays. All right, let's get down to the final stuff because it's interesting. I'm looking at some predictive models, and you're getting – for 2 Power 5 teams with a lot of guys back, it's kind of interesting to me how varied some of the outcomes are. If you go to ESPN's FPI line, I think you've got North Carolina as an 8-point favorite. Is that right? I'm going to double check that. That might be with the home team advantage. No, it's not. Okay, if you consider that a neutral game, then North Carolina is more like a 5.5-point favorite. If you consider Charlotte neutral, SP Plus has got North Carolina as a point favorite. Our model that we are experimenting with this year, which is, I think, based on production and things, one model has got it is North Carolina as a 4-point favorite. The other one's got it more like 35-24 North Carolina. Whichever computer you like, they like the game, or excuse me, they like the Tar Heels. But look, these were programs that went in different directions to end last season. Shane Beamer is a guy whose coaching is a lot of times transcended his talent. But, Blayne, Carolina has played much better ball at season's end than it has at season's beginning. In fact, first couple of months, it's looked ordinary, if not bad, the last 2 years. Now, look, this is a team in year 3 under Shane Beamer. It's going to be better, so maybe you discount that a bit. But it seems like just about everything, and we've been accused when in these things of being an SEC homer channel, we try to call it down the middle as best we see it. A lot of indications here all seem to point to North Carolina in this one.
Yeah, it's gonna be hard for me to pick South Carolina in this one. I believe closer to the model that we have of if we were setting a spread on this one, that Vegas has it at anywhere between 2.5, 3 points. I would have it at 4 in favor of North Carolina, and I wouldn't be surprised if it got up over a touchdown or so. But what you pointed out about special teams, that's a big difference here with these two teams. I do think that could play big, especially early on, having some mistakes, maybe a bad snap on a punt or something like that. South Carolina is very opportunistic, so they could turn a game around in a hurry with that kind of stuff, with their propensity to block kicks, block punts, all that kind of stuff. But I think ultimately North Carolina is the deeper team, and that matters when it's a hot game early on in the season. People cramping up. It's in Charlotte, North Carolina, all that kind of stuff. I'm going to say our computer model, the one that factors in returning production and all this other kind of stuff, not just off of raw statistics, like I said, had North Carolina at a little bit heavier favorite. I'm going to kind of split the middle here, Chris, and I'm going to say North Carolina wins this game 31-27. I'm going to say it's right on that 4-point mark. So I'm going to say North Carolina 31-27.
Yeah, I looked at this, the 62.5 point over under. That's a lot of points, but it almost felt low to me. Now, here's the other thing. You're going to have the clock rules, Blayne, and I'm very curious as to how that is going to affect games this year. There's going to be fewer plays, so maybe that's not too little. I'm going to pick South Carolina plenty of times this year. I like this team. I like the way Shane Beamer gets his teams better at the end of the year where other teams are folding. But just when you put it in doubt, I do think the special teams are going to neutralize a lot of things. But you look at a couple things. One of them is experience. You mentioned that. North Carolina's got more of that coming back this year. And in fact, more than probably most teams in the country, I would think. Number two, turnovers. Last year, basically, South Carolina on a per snap basis, I cannot speak, turned it over about 2.5 times more often than did North Carolina. That's pretty significant. Now, I think South Carolina is going to get better this year. I think Rattler will have a better year. That will come down. But North Carolina is starting from a baseline of where it just did not turn the ball over. And you would think with Drake May, there's no reason that's going to go in any different direction, especially with all the returning linemen that they've got. So there's that. And I think when in doubt, quarterback's a big thing. And no offense to Spencer Rattler, I think he's going to have a much better year. But look, Drake May might be the best in the country. I just think when you try to put it all on a scale and you try to think of it even-handed and not put any bias into it, to me, North Carolina looks like the better team on paper. Not by a lot. I think it's probably a field goal game, but I'm with you. I just think on paper it points to North Carolina. Now, South Carolina's won a lot of games on paper where it didn't match up, but I'm going to go with that being early season, being that North Carolina brings back a lot of guys, and I think we see this about the same.
Just look at the trenches when it comes to North Carolina. That's where I think the matchup early on, if this game was late in the season, if this was the last game of the season instead of the first game, I would probably pick South Carolina because I think that Beamer and company will develop them up front especially. But you look at North Carolina, William Barnes, redshirt senior, their left guard, a graduate. Their center is a graduate. Their right guard is a senior. Their right tackle is a graduate. You flip over to the defensive side, senior, 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 and then the linebackers, 2 seniors and a junior. My goodness. Yeah. I mean, you're old across the front. You're old on the coaching staff with Mac Brown in a good way. You're old with, Gene Chizik having been around. He knows a thing or two about SEC football. And then Chip Lindsey is going to bring a physicality. The reason they brought him in there is to bring some physicality in the run game that North Carolina didn't have last year. I just like them early in the season. Again, Gamecock fans, don't get too mad at us because we're going to pick them a lot more later in the year. But right now I go with North Carolina slightly.
Can't wait to see this one. My goodness, we are about a month out from football, and that will absolutely be one of my must-watch games for week 1. All right, we're going to preview every single game involving Southeastern Conference teams for week 0 and week 1, and really every week this year, including bowl weeks, just as we did last year. We picked every game. We'll do it again this year. Best way to catch those, hit that subscribe button, hit the like button. That helps our analytics. And don't hate us in the comments, Gamecock fans. Again, we're going to be picking your team a lot. Let us know why we're wrong. I'm sure you will. And we'll check back. We'll be here, win or lose. Whoever wins or loses this one will be here to answer for it. Best way to get that, again, hit your notifications, hit the subscribe button. Thanks for watching us here at Southeastern 14. He's Blayne Gilmer. I'm Chris Lee. We'll see you again soon with more SEC football content.